Hey again, everybody. It's Brad. I'm going to do another rules chalk talk. I had a scenario thrown at me regarding windward mark roundings in a port rounding. But before I get to that, I wanted to elaborate on a starboard windward mark rounding and something that somebody pointed out to me. As mentioned in the previous rules chalk talk, 18.3 only applies if a boat in the zone of a mark to be left to port passes head to wind from port to starboard. Okay, so we did that one, but basically 18.3 doesn't even come into application on a starboard rounding. What it ended up being is that essentially, if you look at Rule 18.1, Rule 18 applies, that's mark room, between boats when they are required to leave a mark on the same side and at least one of them is in the zone. However, it does not apply, A, between boats on opposite tacks on a beat to windward. So this doesn't apply. Mark room right now does not apply. We have starboard boat, we have a port boat, okay? Now, one thing I said is basically that puts the port boat at somewhat of a pretty distinct disadvantage in the last chalk talk. Maybe they would overlay the mark. Maybe they would luff up and wait for starboard to round. But it's important to note there is one big moment where starboard's at danger, and I just failed to mention this in the previous chalk talk. Rule 13, and this is kind of, there's 4 rules, 10, 11, 12, 13, and Section A that really deal with right-of-way rules. And those are the ones we're looking at right now because we're not in mark room situation. There's no mark room currently. So the Rule 13 says, after a boat passes head to wind, she shall keep clear of other boats until she is on a close-hauled course. During that time, Rules 10, 11, and 12 do not apply. And so what that means is that basically it goes to the situation where you lose your rights once you pass head to wind, okay, so pointing directly upwind, until you are on a close-hauled course. It's important to know close-hauled course does not have a prerequisite of trimmed sails. So you could have port crew work, or for whatever reason your jib's out luffing, but if you're on a close-hauled course, you are now finished with your tack. Okay, so, or a flatten, for instance, if you're doing dinghy sailing, that doesn't matter. You don't have to wait till the boat's flat. It's when your boat comes down to a close-hauled course. But from here to here is the danger zone for green, okay? So they're coming in on starboard. They have right-of-way. Green has right-of-way over port red and still has right-of-way, but they go head to wind like this and start to cross head to wind. Red has to avoid, and green is in danger of being protested and thrown out of the race. So that's the one scary moment. So how do I deal with that if I'm green, right? What do I do? Well, I can, head down a little bit more like this, and then go like this, because I'm still on starboard, go head to wind, and then peel off there, okay? So I can protect myself by doing that. I could hold my course a little bit longer so that they're, forced to make a decision of ducking or tacking. The one major other thing that can happen, and this is an area where, I had to go and consult our international judge at the club, Glenn Oliver, in fleet racing, and specifically fleet racing, on a starboard rounding, if starboard goes like this, thinking, well, I'm just going to go past and maybe he'll tack like that, but he decides to go like this and duck under me, duck under green here, and then green tacks into here, red now has room. That is a very unique scenario. But I'm going to go back to what I would tell my college team in these scenarios. We don't do starboard roundings and fleet racing in college, but if we did, that is a very small percentage chance that happens. There's an opportunity that might happen, but I don't think you ever want to bank on that as a port boat, because the rule stated is 18.2F. So we're all the way down to F here. If a boat obtained an inside overlap from clear astern or by tacking to windward of the other boat, and from the time the overlap began, the outside boat has been unable to give mark room, she is not required to give it. Okay, so I asked what this meant, and basically what it means is that if green tacked like this and had a bad tack and red tries to sneak in there, as you can see, there's not really enough room for red there. They can't necessarily just auto force green up, okay? So if green was up here and there's clearly enough room, then red can do that. But if there's not enough room, and then it gets into appeals cases and such, which is a whole bunch of fun. But the point being, I think, is, you know, when I'm talking to sailors and to my players, I mean, we don't ever want, as a racer, to be in a scenario where we have some kind of percentage chance in a protest room scenario. You always want to have, you're better off having a 90% performance with a very small percent chance of major damage to your result versus having a 10% chance of like 100% performance. You want to go for the high probability move, okay? So if I'm red and I'm coming in and I'm not sure how this is going to play out, if green's going to go past or not, it might be more advantageous to overlay, or it might be more safe if there's no other starboard boats here to just go like this, have them tack around, and boom, tack around, and I'm right on their stern. I have a chance to get them on the downwind. It's a much more higher return on investment potential there, and low risk move. So, all right, now we're going to move on to a new scenario. That's our starboard roundings. I'm going to close the book on that one. The basic idea behind it is there really isn't mark room between those two boats. And so if you're coming in on port ley line, beware. Make sure you know what you're allowed to do and what you're not. There's not very much you're allowed to do. You really got to be very cautious and think about that very carefully as you're coming in. I got a great discussion. We're going to move on to port roundings now about two boats coming in to the zone from the port ley line, which happens a lot, maybe in Santa Barbara. And in this scenario, they're not overlapped, okay? Because they're not overlapped and they're on the same tack, mark room will apply, meaning green has mark room here and red is entering after them, okay? Like this. And as they move into the zone, green's like, well, great, I got mark room here. And then they decide to, okay, we're on ley line here, I'm going to tack. Okay? And what happens then? In this scenario here, we're going to go to 18.2D. So it's going to kind of give, 18.2 is giving mark room. So 18.2A is when boats are overlapped, the outside boat shall give the inside boat mark room unless rule 18.2B applies. If boats are overlapped when the first of them reaches the zone, the outside boat at that moment shall thereafter give the inside boat mark room, etc., etc. You know, rule C says even if the overlap breaks between them, the outside boat shall continue to give mark room. Then rule 18.2D says rules 18.2B and C cease to apply when the boat entitled to mark room, in this case green, has been given that mark room, or if she passes head to wind or leaves the zone. Okay, so she's passed head to wind, so the mark room B and C turn off. Okay, and now one of two things can happen. They've either gone back to rule 13, again, we're going into our tack, we're here head to wind, from here to here, we're under rule 13, which is well tacking. After a boat passes head to wind, she shall keep clear of other boats until she is on a close hauled course. So here to here, it doesn't matter if their sails are trimmed. She is kind of in a scary position. So if she's got this boat coming up behind and she's here and starting to go, and this boat's like, oh, you're not completed with your tack and has to go like that, then green has fouled red. Okay? However, if green completes their tack and red is here, red is on port and green is on starboard, rule 10, on opposite tacks. All right? Now, what can green do in that scenario? Okay, so they came in ahead of red, clear ahead, and they've got to get to this zone, to the mark here. What they can do is luff up and drift towards the mark. So they're going to get here, luff up like this, So this boat has to say, okay, well, now what do I do? I mean, they have to make a decision. What you're forcing red to do is make a decision. Either they're going to try to go like this, which they're not allowed to because they don't have mark room, and you haven't given it up yet because you haven't crossed head to wind, or they're going to go like this, in which case you complete your tack. And that's it, okay? So if you're that outside boat, luffing up and closing that hole is an important thing to understand. The same is true on a starboard lay line. Understanding that skill of being able to say, I'm going to go like this, and same idea for a starboard rounding. If they're coming from behind you and you have a boat like this behind, green in this situation is going to want to kind of shoot the mark if possible to drift up because they're still technically on starboard until they cross head to wind, and now they're tacking and red can't get a piece of them. Okay, so an important skill to understand coming into windward mark roundings in close scenarios where especially we're going to have to tack around the mark. So one more time to review, this is kind of 18.2D, is that if a boat crosses head to wind, then this mark room that red originally had, when they enter the zone, clear ahead of green, ceases to apply. They get to here and right there, as soon as they go past head to wind. Then they are now no longer under Rule 18, and they're under Rule 13, and then at this point here, when they're on a close hauled course, they're under Rule 10. So they have right-of-way, then they don't have right-of-way, then they have right-of-way again. So knowing how to handle that by simply luffing up to the mark like this, closing the gap, forcing green or the boat behind to make a decision, okay? And that's it for this one. I'm looking forward to moving on to some new rule scenarios after this. So keep sending those questions to racing@sbyc.org.